For the first 30 seconds of this video, imagine discovering that one of Nintendo's most famous characters almost starred in a game so strange, so confusing, and so controversial that it quietly vanished from history. Imagine realizing that Donkey Kong once existed in a version of reality that Nintendo would much rather you never talked about. Because today, we are uncovering the funny, bizarre, and deeply intriguing story of the lost Donkey Kong game Nintendo tried to hide. Why it disappeared, what made it so different, and how its existence changes the way we look at retro gaming, corporate decisions, and the carefully polished image of classic Nintendo. And by the end of this video, you will be questioning how many other forgotten games are buried just beneath the surface of gaming history. When most people think of Donkey Kong, they imagine a clean timeline that moves neatly from arcade chaos to jungle adventures and lovable characters. But retro gaming history is never that simple, because behind every iconic franchise there are experiments that failed, ideas that went too far, and projects that quietly vanished before they could confuse the audience or damage the brand and Donkey. Kang is no exception to this rule. The lost Donkey Kong game exists in that strange space between ambition and uncertainty. A time when Nintendo was still figuring out what Donkey Kong was supposed to be, whether he was a villain, a mascot, a joke, or a problem that needed to be controlled. And that confusion led to a project that felt completely out of place compared to the colorful, friendly image we associate with the character today. What makes this lost game so intriguing is not just that it disappeared, but that it reportedly experimented with ideas that clashed hard with Nintendo's identity, including darker tones, odd mechanics, and design choices that made Donkey Kong feel less like a playful character and more like a chaotic force that players were never meant to fully understand or sympathize with. In the early days of gaming, companies threw ideas at the wall constantly because there were no rules, no expectations, and no established formulas, which meant Donkey Kong was pushed into experimental territory that feels almost surreal by modern standards, blending strange levels. Designs, punishing difficulty, and concepts that felt more unsettling than entertaining, especially for a character that was quickly becoming recognizable worldwide. As kids, we assumed Nintendo always knew exactly what it was doing. But the truth is far funnier and more human. Because many classic characters survived, not because every idea was perfect, but because the bad ones were quietly removed, buried, or forgotten before they could become part of the official story. And this lost Donkey Kong game is a perfect example of that process. One of the strangest aspects of this forgotten project is how little official information exists, which only makes it more intriguing, because when companies avoid discussing something entirely, it often means the project raised uncomfortable questions, performed poorly, or simply did not align with the future direction they wanted audiences to see, making silence the easiest solution. Retro developers worked under extreme limitations, which meant every design decision mattered, and when a game failed to feel fun, intuitive, or marketable, there was rarely time to fix it properly. So shelving the project became the most practical option. Even if it meant erasing months or years of work from history, what makes Donkey Kong as lost game especially fascinating is that traces of its ideas seem to echo faintly in later titles. As if Nintendo recycled safer elements while abandoning the darker core, quietly transforming something uncomfortable into something cheerful, which is both hilarious and revealing about how brands evolve over time. There is also something deeply amusing about the idea that Donkey Kong, a character associated with rhythm, humor, and bananas, once belonged to a project serious enough that Nintendo decided pretending it never happened was the better move. Because it reminds us that even the most family-friendly companies have moments they would rather forget. The gaming industry rarely talks about failure, especially in its early years, but failure is where creativity often grows. And the lost Donkey Kong game represents a creative dead end that still shaped the future, indirectly influencing what Nintendo decided not to do just as much as what it decided to keep. Looking back, it becomes clear that Nintendo's greatest strength was not avoiding mistakes, but learning which experiments needed to disappear so that stronger ideas could survive, which is a process that feels almost invisible unless you start digging into forgotten prototypes, canceled releases, and strange design documents from the past. What makes this story funny is how dramatic it sounds compared to the reality, because the game was not hidden because it was evil or dangerous, but because it was awkward, confusing, and wrong for the character, which is often a far worse crime in game design than being outright bad. As retro gaming fans, we tend to romanticize lost media, imagining secret masterpieces hidden away, but the truth is often more entertaining. Because lost games are usually strange, flawed, and fascinating snapshots of ideas that were not ready for the world, frozen in time by cancellation, the Lost Donkey Kong game reminds us that iconic franchises are not built in straight lines, but through messy experimentation, repeated failure, and constant reinvention. And that even Nintendo, known for its polished image, was once willing to walk away from projects that did not fit the future it wanted to build. It also makes you wonder how different gaming history might look if that game had been released. If Donkey Kong had followed a darker or more chaotic path. And if Mario, Nintendo, and retro gaming itself would feel completely different today as a result, there is something oddly comforting about knowing that even legends have rough drafts, abandoned ideas, and moments they would rather forget, because it makes gaming history feel more human, more experimental, and far more interesting than the clean timelines we usually see. In the end, the Lost Donkey Kong game is not important because of what it was, but because of what it represents. A reminder that behind every beloved franchise, there are ghosts of ideas that never made it out alive, quietly shaping the future from the shadows. If this video made you laugh, question gaming history, or see Donkey Kong and Nintendo in a completely new way, make sure to subscribe to the channel, comment with your thoughts on lost games and forgotten projects, and share this video with anyone who loves retro gaming. Because sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones companies tried to hide.